Look at this. Welcome, everybody. Peter, we have a full house coming on.
Yeah, this is good.
Very exciting. So, welcome, everybody. If you are just joining in, we're going to get started in just a few seconds. If you're a note taker like me, you might want to grab a pen and a paper. I'm very confident Peter's going to say some very intelligent things that you're going to want to make note of. No pressure there, right, Peter?
Nah, nah.
By the way, let's have fun on this call today, everybody. If you want to interact in the chat, actually, I love doing this. If you're in the chat, let us know where you are dialing in from today. Peter and I are both in California. Always fun to see where everybody is at. I'm assuming we have a nice global community here, people interested in helping to protect the planet. Don't be shy.
Well, actually, I'm more interested in protecting our kids. That's going to be fine, Rich.
We have a lawn in Israel. Julia is in your backyard. A few
Yeah.
people, Bay Area, Los Gatos, Tucson today. Here we go. East Coast, Pittsburgh, Boston, San Diego down the road from me, Philippines, Jane in Sarasota, Alina in Vancouver. Look at that. Serbia, Napa. Let's all go to Napa. Edina, Minnesota. There you, Joe. Maine. Look at that. We got the whole country covered and most of the world. All right. So welcome, everybody. We are going to begin. Um, Most of you know who I'm going to be talking to today, and that is Peter Fiekowsky. You probably don't know who I am, so I want to do a quick introduction. My name is Rich Gurman. I'm actually in Laguna Beach, California, Southern California. I've been a coach, an author, and a speaker since 1999. And most recently, I'm more of an ocean photographer and ocean conservationist. I have a nonprofit called Project O. And pretty much every day, except for days like today where there's a rainstorm, I could be found on the ocean paddleboarding with dolphins and whales and taking photos and shooting video of these marine animals. I've paddleboarded about 30,000 miles in the last 14 years, which is more than the whole circumference of the planet. And I've had a couple thousand encounters with dolphins and whales. So for me, my great love is the sacred life that lives in the ocean and whatever work we can do to help protect the ocean and that sacred life. And like we're going to talk about a lot today, when we protect the ocean and the life in it, we're also doing our work to protect humanity. I met Peter, when was it, Peter? Maybe about 3 months ago. And I was all in with everything that Peter had to say almost immediately. I personally feel that we are in an all hands on deck moment, one that we've never had in the history of humanity. And when I met Peter and saw that not only does he have a solution for the most pressing issue of all time on our planet, he is also doing it for all the right reasons. And he'll talk a lot about that today. I think today you're going to meet two sides of Peter. You're going to meet Peter, the scientist, who's going to logically talk about our plan to restore the climate of the planet. And the other side of Peter that I love, which is Peter, the humanitarian. So, quick intro of Peter in case you don't know who Peter is. He is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, a philanthropist. He has 27 patents, which is 27 more than I do. He's a graduate of MIT. He worked at NASA, and he is the author of the book Climate Restoration. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Rich. I'm well. I'm excited about this. We
Yeah,
actually get to give people the whole story today.
we have a lot we're going to cover, and we have a great group of people out there. So if you're just joining in, see Tim just joined in from New Zealand. Welcome, everybody, to our call today. What we're going to cover is essentially four things. One is how we can mimic nature to restore the climate of the planet by 2050 so that humanity can flourish. Two, we're going to talk about our bold plan for 2024, which is right around the corner, where we want to start the process of turning the tide on dangerous greenhouse gas levels. Three, we're going to talk about how you can be a part of the solution. And then finally, at the end, we're going to do a live Q&A. Like I said at the very beginning, we want this to be interactive, so please feel free to comment in the chat as we are going through our material. And for sure, if you have questions at the end, which should be around the top of the hour, you'll be able to either put a question in the chat or raise your hand and we will call upon you. So Peter, let's dive in. I feel like a lot of people on the line already know Peter. By the way, if you work with Peter before, just go in the chat and just give us a yes. I'm assuming, Peter, there's a lot of people that know you, are friends of yours, have worked with you. So for a lot of you, this might be familiar stuff. So it might be a refresher. I know personally, Peter, I can't hear this stuff enough. So let's begin with you, if you will. Can you lay out the problem for us? What are we facing if we continue on our current trajectory?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Everyone talks about the climate, and we all know that we've been burning fossil fuels for 300 years. I'm not going to belabor that. The bottom line is we've got floods and droughts and Category 5 hurricanes, wildfires. Now we've got a outbreak of depression and suicide now, right, all over the world because life is getting pretty miserable. So that's what we're up against, is a sense that this planet is not going to be good for our kids. And well, yeah, that's what we're up against. And we're also up against our historical goals, which don't give us any hope. They say, oh, maybe we can reduce the worst aspects of climate. What does that mean?
So we've already got people, like you said, like depressed over the current reality. The good news today, everybody, is we're going to really paint a picture of a positive future. And that's what is the main focus. But we just need to start with a little doom and gloom. If people are already worried today, if we keep on our current track, what is a realistic future for us?
Well, who knows is the answer. Joe, go ahead and put up that first slide, which may be the only slide, which everyone who knows me has seen many times, and thousands of people who don't know me have seen many times. This is CO2 over the last million years. You can see right near the middle where humans evolved about 250, 300,000 years ago. And you can see CO2 going up and down. Where it's low is an ice age, where it's high is a warm period, like we were in. We're in a hot period now. And we can see, for a million years, our planet has been going up and down, and we survived the ice ages, obviously. And you can see the highest level humans have ever survived, that black line in the middle at 300. And then you can also see where we are now, way up there. And then you can see, like, why is the Paris net zero goal off the page? And that's the hopelessness that people are dealing with. And I'll say more about it, but the reason why that Paris net zero goal is off the page is that it was designed in the 1980s when CO2 was much lower, and they need a new strategy. And that's one of the biggest things that we're working on. No, take it down. Good. Oh, unmute. Joe, we unmute Rich.
I actually muted myself for a second. I couldn't unmute. Thank you.
I know.
So one of the you mentioned Paris. Obviously there's big talk about net zero, and in your mind, net zero is not the solution. Can you explain why?
Yeah, well, net zero was the solution in the 70s when it was first discussed, and even in the early 80s, because if we were to have turned off all of industry, CO2 would still be at safe levels. Now, net zero means it's not going to get much worse. And those of us who are old enough to remember the 80s, we didn't see any problem with the climate then. Now, CO2 is already 50% higher than it was when the 10,000 years when we developed agriculture. And so no one has any idea what will happen. We do know that dozens and hundreds of indigenous cultures are going away because they can't grow the crops. If they're Arctic, then their permafrost is melting. The whales and fish that they used to eat, they're no longer there. So we know things are terrible. And of course, climate restoration means bringing it back the way it was 100 or 200 years ago.
So let's shift that. We don't want to be too doom and gloom here. So the good news is we have a solution. We know how to solve the greatest challenge mankind has ever faced. So, Peter, is climate restoration really possible? And is it safe and financially feasible?
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce it the way I've been introducing it lately. So a lot of people have heard this story. But imagine there was a button you could press. And if you press that button, then in 20 years, CO2 would be back to what it was 100 years ago. Would you press that button?
Yes. In fact,
Yeah.
let's go in the chat. If you are a yes to that one, it's an easy answer. Please
An
put
easy
yes in
answer.
the chat.
Right. Everyone looks at me and they say, well, if it's not a trick question, the answer is yes. So if you had that thought, everyone else does too.
Carol said,
And
duh.
so, and we have that button and we're not pressing that button. And so the question is, how do we, what is that button? And then what do we have to do to free ourselves up to press it?
Mm.
And so the button, and Joe, go ahead and put that graph back up again. The button is to do the same thing that nature does, which is, we have ice ages periodically. Again, you can see the CO2 levels going up and down 10 times in the last million years. And the amount it goes up and down is the amount of CO2 we need to take back out to get us back to safe levels. And so we know that the planet does it because we have history. Uh, there's a little science here. The way we know what the CO2 was 400,000 years ago or 800,000 years ago is bubbles of air got caught in the glaciers in the Antarctica and Greenland. And then the scientists drilled cores and pulled out the ice and measured how much CO2. So it's a direct measurement of what the CO2 was in those years. And so the smart thing to do is to do the same thing that nature did, which is ocean fertilization. Because the thing people ask is like, oh my God, where does this sit? Where are we going to put the carbon? And the answer is in the ocean, which is what nature does. That nature, and every time the CO2 goes down, uh, nature is using photosynthesis, like in trees, but photosynthesis in the ocean. And in the ocean, when plants die, they and the animals that eat them sink. And so they can't rot. Whereas on land, when a tree dies, after a few years, it'll rot and the carbon will, or burn, and the carbon will go back into the air. So, okay, you can take the slide down.
Yeah, one of
So,
the, oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say the thing that I personally love and the reason I jumped in all in with you is that all of the methods that you are proponent of to restore the climate are simply replicating nature. They're biomimicry. We're not in some lab somewhere doing some crazy science experiments, like mad scientists. It is simply doing what nature has always done to keep the climate safe. So in your book, Climate Restoration, you mentioned the four big pathways. You just mentioned ocean iron fertilization, which to me seems like the linchpin to massive CO2 removal that's required, which I think is about 1,000 gigatons, which is a lot of CO2. That and methane removal would be the two big ones. So let's since you brought up OAF, ocean iron fertilization, let's go a little deeper into that. So how does it work? How does it replicate nature? Maybe mention Mount Pinatubo, and then we'll talk about the safety of it, the costs of it, and whatnot. So how does it
yeah.
work?
Yeah, well, first let me handle the question of in the book, and a lot of the people will have read the book, and we talk about the big four solutions, and we don't really talk about those anymore. And the reason is that it's been 3 years since we wrote the book, and the UN says we have until 2030 to turn this ship around. Well, that means we've only got 4 years now, 6 years now to turn the ship around. So we're focusing just on the two things that we know work because nature does them, and they can work quickly. So we'll talk later on about the two solutions and then the three systems to back them up.
Perfect.
So you asked about the ocean fertilization. How does that work? Well,
Yes.
what nature does is at certain periods at the beginning of ice ages, we get extra dust storms. And what happens is for various reasons, the grasslands get drier. And when the grassland is dry, you get dust more of the year. When the grassland is lush and green, you don't get much dust. And so the grasslands get drier, you get more dust blown into the ocean. It doesn't take a lot of dust. When you do the math, it comes out to 20,000 tons a year or something like that, more dust. So not very much more dust, but the right place in the right time. And that dust provides the missing micronutrient that's needed in the ocean so for plants to grow, for phytoplankton, which is the plants in the ocean. And like in any life, both animals and plants need iron. Not very much, but just a little bit to make our chemistry work. And so in the ocean, iron is scarce because it doesn't dissolve well in water, as you can imagine. And so it sinks to the bottom. And so the only places in the ocean that are blue, I mean, are green. The ocean mostly is a beautiful blue, which as a swimmer, I love. But, as someone who as sort of the biologist part of me says, oh, I want the green ocean where there's lots of life happening and it's food for the fish. And so the only places you see green ocean are where you get dust blowing or you get currents, either dust blowing or volcanic ash blowing, or sometimes just a current bringing nutrients up from the deep. And so the ocean iron fertilization works by duplicating that process, but usually instead of, you could blow it, you could blow the dust, but it turns out to be easier just to have a bag of iron sulfate, usually, sometimes iron oxide. You just get at the garden store. Of course, you would buy it in larger quantity, but you can get the iron sulfate from your garden store. It's very inexpensive. Put in the ship, dissolve it in the water, and dilute it. Tremendous dilution. The amount is per square meter is about 1/100th of a teaspoon. So just a few grains per square meter, roughly once a year, and only in certain areas. And that's the process of iron fertilization. It's the same thing nature does, except doing it from a ship rather than by wind. And the reason to do it by ship is you can put it exactly where it's the most effective. The wind is rather arbitrary. And you started asking about Pinatubo. Do you want to say more about
Yeah,
that? Say more.
I'd love you to talk about that because it's one thing you don't talk about in your book. So maybe people haven't heard that, the story of that eruption and the impact that it had.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 1991 in June, there was a huge volcanic eruption in the Philippines called Mount Pinatubo. And what's interesting is the following year, our planet reached net zero. And so there was enough iron in the dust from that volcanic eruption, landed in the South China Sea, in an eddy there, and it got enough phytoplankton growing. It got enough phytoplankton growing so that it absorbed all of the CO2 we emitted in 1992, which was 20,000 megatons, 20 gigatons of CO2. And it hadn't been noticed. Joe, pull up the second slide, and I'll point that out. Why it hadn't really been noticed. And whoops, nope, not that one. That one, yes. And so if whoever has the cursor there, if you can point out in 1991, the CO2 over time is a little flat point. So the top graph is CO2, yeah, right there. You can see to the left of the blue line, that's the historical CO2. And you can see it went above the safe level in 1920, useful to remember. And then in 1992, it was flat. but it doesn't jump at you, but you have to look at it. And so earlier this year, I started doing the mathematical analysis of it and realized and just did the calculation that it's actually 20,000 gigatons were removed that year. And that led what's interesting is the theory doesn't allow it. So you can take this down now. And the theory for ocean fertilization is quite complex, and the scientists are still saying, you know what, that's impossible. That can't be true. And I say, well, there's data. Maybe you need to update your theory to match the data. The main issue is they hadn't considered the fact that there's nitrogen fixing bacteria, which will provide the nitrates, and there was enough dust that would have phosphates in it from the volcano to provide all the nutrients. But the point is it happened, and our big project now is a Pinatubo replication. And what's nice about that is it alleviates the political issues about climate. And because if we said we want to restore the climate, now you're going up against the UN goal, which is to stabilize the climate. And if we said, oh, we want to restore it, you got to deal with the politics, which we'll talk about roughly next.
Yeah, we'll get to that next. So one of the things I've been trying to figure out since the day I met you is why are we not already doing this? It replicates nature, so it's a natural process. It's safe, and we can answer questions on how it's safe or how potentially might not be, but you're convinced it's safe. It's extremely inexpensive, which we can talk about also in the scheme of things, and it works. So I'm just going to ask you flat out. I think it's important. Why are we not already doing this? Why is OIF controversial? Are there risks? Are there side effects?
Right. Well, the future is unknown, of course, but the past is known. And as I said, the UN goals were created in the 1980s, and they said that we want to stabilize the climate, to eliminate human interference in the climate. And because of that, when people propose to do ocean fertilization, which can, if you remember that CO2 graph with the CO2 going up, you can definitely change CO2 levels. And so the sort of the orthodoxy says, don't do that. That's geoengineering, and it goes against the 1980, 1990 rules. And that's the reason we're not doing it. Joe, pull up that same graph again, and I'll show you very dramatically what the problem. And so if you look at the top right, the two top curves, one says IPCC SSP 1-1.9. Well, those two top lines on the top right are the UN best projections. And so you'd say, well, why is the UN only best suggestion for us something that we can't survive? Like, it's way above 300 parts per million, and even way above 350 parts per million of CO2. And the answer, as I said, is that when they wrote their mission statement, they said our goal is to eliminate human interference. And so the scientists said, you know what, we're not allowed to tell the public how to interfere with the climate. So it's a historical accident. But you can see the difference between the IPCC goals and the climate restoration goals. The graph on the bottom I love. That's temperature. And I think most of us have heard about the UN goals of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. On this one, this graph, it peaks at 1.5 degrees. So I'm only looking at the most optimistic projections. What we want is the bottom right, which is that big red dot on the bottom right, which is 0 degrees. We want our children or our grandchildren in 2100 to have 0 degrees warming, have it be exactly the same as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And go ahead.
I struggle with this when you say we don't want human interference. What have humans been doing nonstop since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution? We've been interfering. We put ourselves in this situation. So let's talk. I want to talk a little bit more of the safety of it. If you went
Yes,
online and Googled it, you'll find some potential downfalls of it where you would the main one, the only one really is the potential of dangerous algae blooms. Can you explain how this when somebody asked in the chat actually where are the best spots to do this process? Can you explain a little bit how dangerous algae blooms only really occur close to shore, and we would be doing this way offshore?
exactly. Yeah, so harmful algal blooms, HABs, as they're called in the business, they're coastal. Many of us have heard about the dead areas outside the Mississippi Delta, where you get all the nutrients from the whole Midwest of the US dumped into the Mississippi, into the Gulf of Mexico, and the ecosystem practically goes dead because there's too much nutrients, too much algae, and lack of oxygen. As Rich said, that's only in the coastal areas where you have lots of runoff. In the deep ocean, the amount of iron, for example, is about 1/1,000,000th of what it is in coastal areas because the iron doesn't dissolve well and it sinks to the seafloor. And so the harmful algal blooms are only a coastal phenomenon. They're not a problem here.
Very
Uh,
good.
the other things people talk about, as I said, is lack of oxygen. Now, lack of oxygen sounds bad to us. It's how it's, but if you look at it over the history of our planet, that's how you got ice ages, is there was lack of oxygen in the deep ocean, which is why the carbon didn't oxidize back into CO2. So we know nature is totally accommodated to that lack of oxygen that happens. People will ask, well, can the ocean handle that much carbon, that much extra carbon? And it's about maybe 1.5% more carbon than is in the ocean. So it's, again, roughly 1% more carbon. So definitely not a problem for the ocean.
Very good. So I want to talk next about our plan for next year, which is to actually start doing this process. But I want to back up a minute. You mentioned getting political support for this. So one of the things that we're focused on, we call the Biden Project. So can you explain our plan to get the president to endorse this vision?
Yeah. So here's how I want people to think about it, is we have two solutions. The ocean fertilization is the key solution. And if you read the book, you're familiar with methane oxidation, which we're not going to discuss much more than a half a minute right now. But those of you who are familiar with a potential methane burst from the melting permafrost, the methane oxidation gives us an insurance policy to make sure that if the methane burst has started, and everyone's praying or hoping that it won't get serious. And probably it won't, but probably is a bad deal for our grandkids or kids or for us. So the methane oxidation is an insurance policy. And again, it uses the natural process for one of the natural processes for oxidizing methane in the atmosphere. But that's a talk for another time. So we have the two solutions together. They're about $1 billion a year. That's 1% of New York City's budget, just to put it in perspective, 1% of New York City's budget. If you're looking at donors, that would be, if you took the 1%ers in our country and each put in $1 a day, a quarter of a cup of coffee a day, that would pay for the whole thing, for the whole planet. So we're talking about something very simple, just because basically nature has optimized these over the millennia, and it's very inexpensive because it's just a matter of triggering processes that nature has honed. So then what we have the simple technical solutions, duplicating nature, then what does it need to have those succeed? And it turns out there are only three systems that we need. The first, as you mentioned, is the Biden project. We have to get our concept of climate back to restoration, conscious of our children. And the goal of the Biden project is for Biden in 24, hopefully in the first quarter or second quarter of 2024, to say, I'm committing the US to restoring a safe climate for our children and future generations. He doesn't have to talk about how, he doesn't have to talk about spending money, because that can be paid for by people like us. If you've got 1,000 of us and we each put in a million, oh, never mind, a million of us and put in 1,000 a year, we would do it. So the government doesn't have to be involved. So if one party wants to oppose another party, they can, and that won't block the success of this. And then so that's the Biden project, and we've geared up for it. And then actually, yeah, I'm not going to show you the slide. In California, we had a bill passed, a resolution in July saying that California is committed to restoring a safe climate for our children and future generations. So it passed without opposition. So we know it's not a big deal. And we're working now to get it introduced into Congress to do the same thing.
Very good.
And we're building up that. We're developing a symposium at MIT to get academic support. And we're working to get some billionaires involved to also show that they're supporting it. And of course, I love having Rich here because there are a lot of nonprofits who really care about the ocean. They say, you know what, if this actually restores the ocean, brings the ocean acidity back to what it used to be, which is what it will, trust the physicist here. When we restore CO2, that restores the ocean acidification so back to normal. A lot of nonprofits are beginning to line up once they see that they won't be chastised. And so we're approaching it from 5 different angles.
Yeah, I feel like, I just came into this project a few months ago and you've been working at this for years. I feel like we're really hitting a tipping point. We're starting to see government support, NGO support, general population supporting the whole notion of climate restoration, which is probably the easiest of all the support we need. I think the financial support to do the big work will come. So things really seem to be coming together. You just made me think of something when you talked about ocean acidification. In your book, you say that ocean iron fertilization can bring back the whales, which is very exciting to me. I want to talk about the projects next that our goals are to get underway next year. But first, how will this bring back the whales? I need to ask you that.
Yes. Well, it's a two-way street because the first thing is there was a big test, not a big, but a full-scale test done in 2012 in the Gulf of Alaska. And it was just 70 tons of iron sulfate. And it brought back a lot of fish. It was, I think the pink salmon harvest the following year was 4 or 5 times higher than the state of Alaska had predicted it would be based on the historical trends.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually the highest they'd ever seen and they've ever seen since. And they also noticed 2.5 years later that for the first time there were births of orca whales. There hadn't been any orca whale births in the Gulf of Alaska for about 5 or 6 years because the ecosystem has been collapsing. But by providing food for everyone, but the females had food and they actually gave birth, went to term and gave birth to young orcas. And so we can see that this is a way to bring them back. The wonderful thing is whales accelerate the carbon removal. That's because right. They bring back a lot of the iron and other nutrients from the deep ocean.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that in the chat that whales create upwelling, which will help the process too. So yeah, for a whale lover like myself, that's like the most exciting to me part of this to me. And oh, by the way, if we can help the humans, that's a win-win. So speaking of win-wins, let's talk about our plan for next year. And that is to launch 2 to 3 pilot programs of OIF, ocean iron fertilization. And we're talking to countries in Africa, in Indonesia, and Palau. And our goal is by mid of 2024, we want to have boats in the water and be doing this process. And the beauty of these 3 areas that I just mentioned, and you can speak more about it, is 1, they want it already, right? We're already in communication. They see the benefit of it. They want it. Number 2 is we will be able to get results. And what's cool is, and you can speak to this, we'll know quickly how fast the results are and what the results are of the difference in CO2. And then we can show the world that this works and then scale the whole thing. And then the third part, which I think is really exciting, is the benefit to local fisheries. The countries that I just mentioned, in most cases, if not all, their biggest economy is their local fisheries. So this will have a huge impact, as you mentioned, the growth of the fish stocks on their local communities. And these are frontline communities that are most vulnerable to climate change. So for me, the idea that we can go into these places, help their local economies, and at the same time be sequestering huge amounts of CO2 and help the planet overall, it's kind of the ultimate win-win. So can you speak a little bit more to the big picture of what we want to do for next year?
Yeah, for the ocean fertilization, it's very exciting. I'm afraid I'm going to make it a little bit too complicated, so I apologize in advance. But the approach we're taking is creating an agreement reality that if everyone thinks we're restoring the climate, then we're all going to act like we're restoring the climate and we'll take the appropriate actions. Conversely, the UN has taken us to, well, we're heading to a climate disaster. And of course, all of our actions are consistent with going into a climate disaster. The fact that we haven't turned around emissions and so on and so on and so on. And so we're created by going from multiple angles. So we have roughly 10 countries already that have expressed strong interest in restoring their fisheries. And of course, restoring the climate. Which of those will be the first ones to move and which will get investors or donors to put in the $5 or $20 million required to get it started. We shall see. But there's so many players, both countries as well as donors, that I'm super confident that we'll get our ships in the water in 2024. Now, we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, the fact that Mount Pinatubo produced this amazing effect, well, that's really great. Now, there have been a lot of other volcanoes, and they didn't produce that same effect. So we know that if you feed the fish will grow. Anyone who's had an aquarium knows that. I don't have to provide a scientific proof to that. But a lot of times, if you provide the phytoplankton, it doesn't sink, that the fish eat it all, and it doesn't go down. And so some of the tests are going to probably fail, because we're going to have to learn exactly what happens. Now, the scientific community is doing computer modeling. And I don't know well, you probably haven't done computer modeling. I've done computer modeling. And, we don't know everything about the ocean. So the computer modeling is very feeble. But it's the best they've got, and that's what they do. We want to do the field testing and figure out how we're going to replicate Mount Pinatubo and actually get 20 or 60 gigatons per year out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, so
Now,
we actually want to do this, not just talk about it and not do it in the lab, do it in the ocean where it can actually make an impact, right?
yeah, and if things go more slowly than we hope, we can do the fishery restoration without worrying too much about the climate. Once the scientific community sees that you can do ocean fertilization without getting politically attacked, then the scientific community will promote it to the UN and to the Department of Energy and so on. At the moment, Carol and I did a study of carbon dioxide removal projects. And what we discovered is that the only projects that get funded from the government, and up to like $6 billion a year, are the ones that are so inefficient that they can't reduce CO2 levels. Because the scientists, though, they won't get accused of reducing CO2 levels because their technology can't do that. And they won't be called a geoengineer. And so this is intended to break that glass ceiling so that in the future, scientists and environmentalists will feel comfortable saying, we are restoring the climate. So the point is lots of different angles at once. Some will go faster than others. Biden, if we're lucky, Biden will make his declaration on Earth Day. Wouldn't that be great? On Earth Day 2024, President Biden says, my gift to humanity is committing the US to restoring a safe climate. That could happen. And if it's not 24 and it's 25, that's okay also.
That'd be great. And I think it's important to note also, like I mentioned a little while ago, we are working to get the buy-in of the governments, of the fisheries, of the indigenous communities, the nonprofits. It's a very much a collaborative approach, doing it differently than maybe things have been done in the past. And like we said at the outset, this is an all hands on deck moment in time. So let's talk about the cost of just staying the course. In my mind, we're at a crossroads. We either restore the climate, make it safe for our children and their children, or like we said at the outset, we're in trouble. You call this the ethical dilemma. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the ethical dilemma, which is the purpose of the Biden project, is that everyone I've ever spoken to says, yes, we do have an ethical obligation to make sure our children survive. And then we have the language from the UN, which says that we have to, that the way we're going to do that is by eliminating human interference in the climate system, which at this point is essentially a death sentence for humanity as we know it. Uh, some people will almost certainly survive because there's always some place on the planet where the conditions are okay for humans. Uh, uh, I like to say that Bill Gates's kids will probably be just fine. But humanity as a whole, we're going to lose a lot of cultures, a lot of ecosystems if we stay the course, if we follow the old language. And so the ethical dilemma is, do we follow our heart and restore the climate, or do we follow the 1980s language? I think it's pretty obvious. We've got to get the government to shift.
Absolutely. So lay out the vision for us. If we actually do this, what do you see the future for your grandkids, the future where everyone can flourish? What does that look like to you?
Well, on the one hand, it's great. The people who've read our book know that if you look at a success in the future looks like, of course, the climate coming back to what it was 100, 200 years ago, which means the ecosystems, the rainforests, all those gradually coming back. We'll never know how long it'll take until we get there. And people say, cynics say, well, you can never go back. Well, of course you can never go back. When I go back to the elementary school I went to, it is not the same on Reno Road in Washington, D.C. You can never go back. But, by golly, it's still a brick building, and the kids still play there. It's just, they have air conditioning now and so
Picturing a
on.
red schoolhouse, K through
It's
12.
pretty close to that. It's an adorable school, Merch School in Washington, D.C. But the point is that we have to be straight that we're not doing time reversal. We're actually just bringing the climate back. And so it's much more exciting because, I love going back to, say, my old elementary school and high school because they've changed. It's so cool to see what's happening, but it's healthy. And so a lot of species will come back and a lot of species won't. But then there'll be new species which will come and take their place. And the other thing is the global population is beginning to come back down again. So birth rates everywhere are coming down. Economists are pulling their hair out, but they're gradually realizing that it's going to be fine. That the countries where their populations are shrinking, like Japan and South Korea and China, their economies are doing great. Now China's has a bumpy road. The transition can be hard, but uh, those of us, I'm 68. I remember what traffic was like when I was a kid, and you did not in the 60s have traffic jams like we have everywhere now, because the population was a third of what it is now. So, yeah, so it'll be very good, and there's no reason we won't do it. We have enough people here. We've got 97 people on our just here today, and none of us are going to give up. None of us are going to go home and say, "Well, that was a good idea. Let me go watch movies tonight." Hopefully, we'll watch movies tonight, but not to give up on restoring the climate. So there's no reason that we're not going to do it,
Yeah,
and this is better.
it's perfect that you said that because that's exactly what I was just thinking. Like, we have 100 people here right now that all want the same thing.
Yes.
And there's millions of us. Like, who wouldn't want, if there's one thing I think we can all agree on, is we want to survive as a species. We want a safe planet for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, for the animals, for everyone. And I think the big question people have is, how can I help? How can I be a part of the solution? And so let's talk about that, if I may. And the truth is, we want every one of you to join us and be a part of the solution. And to me, this is a really exciting opportunity for everybody here to really be at the tip of the spear, to be an early adopter of something that, like I said at the beginning, I'm all in, because I can't think of anything at all to do than spend time on something that's going to help the planet and all life on this planet. So we want you to become a donor and support what we're doing. I personally believe this is a chance for you to leave a legacy for your family, for the planet, and really lead by example. And so if you choose to become a donor, we want to take a minute now and just talk about how your donation will be used in the very short term. As we mentioned a little while ago, our plan is to launch 3 ocean restoration projects next year. And when we say launch, we mean, like we said, boats in the water, reduction of CO2. Peter mentioned monitoring of results. How is this working? Is it not working? Oh, this is working good. What do we need to tweak to really do it right? And the goal is to prove to the world that this will work and then scale it globally. And Peter, that's one thing you didn't mention. We wanted to start with a few projects, see that it works, and then just take a minute, if you will, and explain, to do this globally and pull that 1,000 gigatons out, how big does this need to be? And it's, as you mentioned already, it's a very affordable thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The it- we're learning a lot, and we're going to continue learning a lot. A year ago, before we did the Pinatubo research, we were saying it will take 500 projects like happened in 2012 in the Gulf of Alaska. And that each of those costs about $1 million to $2.5 million. The first one was about 2.5. Their actual expenses were about 1.5. So we figured $500–600 million a year to do it that way. When we looked at Mount Pinatubo and discovered that, just one project removed 20 gigatons, which is a third of what we need. So we only need 3 Pinatubo replications. So it'd be about, in each of those would be about 100 million. So about $300 million generously per year. And in reality, we'll find out. It'll be somewhere in between 3 Pinatubo-sized projects or 500 of the Alaska-sized projects.
That's right.
And yeah, and that's what it will take to get started. We're working to raise about $5 million. And one of the great things is, as I said, if all the 1%ers in the country contributed, it would be a done deal. To get them started, we want to get our friends contributing so they can
That's
say,
right.
oh, this is an acceptable thing to do.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. This is a legacy moment. This is like, I love that phrase, tip of the spear. It's super exciting. So we just want you to be clear. We are doing this and we need your help. To me, Peter, this is the ultimate, if not us, then who, and if not now, when moment, right? Like, to me, we no longer have the luxury of time. And so we are all in on this. So let's do this. To me, this is an investment in the future of the planet, for
Yeah.
your family,
Well,
for your kids, and for your grandkids. Go ahead.
Rich, one of the things that's really exciting about it for me is a lot of the work I've done over the years has been advocacy, trying to change people's opinion, getting people to do things. This one is very different. As a physicist, I love physically changing the planet, and it turns out to be much easier than anything that's political. So separate from all the politics, uh, getting the boats, and there are lots of boats out there. Because the boats can be old boats. They don't need to be very reliable because you're not shipping cars from China to Europe or anything. And so there's the boats in the water. There's we're working on the satellite data analysis so that using satellite data, we can actually measure how much CO2 is being removed and then optimize it. If you're an engineer or a process person or any kind of project person, you've got to measure or your process won't work. And so we're already putting together the projects for measurement, and that's coming out of the grandparents fund right now. And then the Biden project to get the symposium at MIT is going to take some money. Again, other people will put money in, but we need to seed it so people can see the seed
That's right.
growing, and then the millionaires will put their money in.
Exactly. And so, yeah, Joe, if you could put that link in the chat again. Peter mentioned the grandparents fund. That is where your donations will be going to. A couple of things I want to mention. This is 100% tax deductible, anything that you donate. And part of the reason we wanted to do this webinar now before the holidays is you can make a donation that'll go towards your taxes for this year. A couple of things that are cool. If you donate $100 per month or more, obviously, you're going to get a signed copy of Peter's book, Climate Restoration. If you do $500 or more per month, there's the book. At $500 or more per month, we will do a private webinar, just like we're doing here, for your contacts, for your audience, for, if you have a handful of friends like yourself that care about this issue and want to be part of the difference, whatever you want, we will do. Peter and I will
For
hop
your
on
favorite
a call.
nonprofit.
Say it again.
For your favorite nonprofit, maybe you're a
Yeah.
major donor to the Environmental Defense Fund or to the Sierra Club.
Yeah.
You can set up a webinar for them.
Very good. So, yeah, please click on that link, and Joe will keep putting in there as more comments come in the chat. The link goes away, so Joe will keep putting it in there. Just click on that link. It'll take you right to a very simple page that'll show you. You've probably been on pages like that before, where you can choose the amount that you want to donate and how you want to do it. And we are super grateful for any support. Last couple of things, Peter, and then we'll go to Q&A. I'm sure there's a lot of questions in the chat we haven't seen because we've been talking, and then we'll tell you. You can either put a question in the chat or raise your hand. We'll tell you how to do that in a moment. My question is for both of us, and I'll answer it first, and then you can think about it. I'm just curious why you are all in on this. I mean, you have dedicated your life to this, so I'll answer first why I'm all in. And I kind of said at the beginning, to me, life is a miracle. This planet is an absolute miracle. And as I said at the onset, for me, it's about the ocean, it's about the marine animals, and it like breaks my heart to see how humans are destroying the natural resources of the planet. How we are I mean, they say that 1 million species of animals will go extinct if we continue on the current path that we're on. And they're absolute innocent victims in human interaction. So that breaks my heart. And to see how we treat ourselves is also heartbreaking. I love a lot of people that I've talked to about the work that I'm doing with you. They see the big picture. They're like, wait a minute. This is not only about restoring the climate of the planet. This is about humanity flourishing and coming together. And the good news is, as heartbreaking as all that is, it's not too late. And as we said, we know what to do. We just need the will to act. And I think, Peter, you said it perfectly. Like, yeah, it's going to cost a lot more money than we're talking about and what is realistic for people to donate here today. But this is about creating that groundswell of support. And once we have boats in the water and we're getting results, and you guys can each be a part of making that happen. And then, I mean, it's giving me chills as I talk about it. Like, this is the beginning, and then we see it catch on, and then all of a sudden, imagine 500 boats in places all around the world, helping all these local economies boom, which they need so badly in these very vulnerable areas, and just seeing the numbers of CO2 being pulled out of the atmosphere and sequestered, like, it's super, super exciting. So, Peter, that's why I'm all in. Why have you dedicated your whole life to this?
Well, I put together a mission statement for myself about 20 years ago, which is on the wall hanging right above the monitor here. And it says, my mission in life is to leave a world that we're proud of to our children. And I recently added to it, and to set up humanity to flourish for a million years. Now, I know what a million years is for everyone else. I say for thousands of years, but most people don't have haven't done the geological history that I've done to even imagine a million years. Well, at a certain point, I gave up. You know, if you read the book, you'll see the story. But the UN and the scientific community were not focused on making sure our children survived. And I said, well, that's, if you're not working on that, why would we work on the climate at all? Let me work on something important. And so I went back to work on poverty reduction in Africa, and we got some great work done there. But I realized that that wasn't going to work because I have kids, and I would not be proud to give them the world we have right now. It'd just be embarrassing. It's that simple. I would be embarrassed. My brother often has the embarrassment test. How embarrassed would you be if if this thing happened? And thank you, my brother Nick. I use that. So that's
That's why
why I
I'd say it's the will to act. Like you, how yeah, you knowing what you know. Like I didn't know this before I met you, and I'm like, oh, we can help protect the ocean and save the dolphins and whales by doing this. I'm in. Like you having the knowledge you have, like you have to do it. You don't have a
yes.
choice. So I just feel blessed that you have attracted all these amazing people today
Mm.
can support. So we are so on time. I love it. It makes my brain happy. So Joe, if you could keep putting that link in the chat. And we're going to shift into Q&A. First of all, I want to acknowledge the people that have already stepped up and made a donation, become monthly donors. You guys are awesome. Again, if you do $100 or more a month, you're going to get a signed copy of Peter and Carol's book, Climate Restoration. If you are super bold and do $500 or more a month, which we would love, we will do a private webinar for you, your audience. Could be just you if you want, whoever you want. Anyone that we can help spread the message to. So as we shift into Q&A mode, there's two ways that you can ask a question. One is to put it in the chat. I am way behind on looking in the chat because I've been focused on Peter this whole time. So if there's a question you put in the chat like 40 minutes ago, maybe put it in the chat again. The better way, in my mind, to ask a question is to raise your hand. So I'm assuming this is not your first Zoom call, but just a quick lesson. If you hit on at the bottom, hit reactions near the bottom right, and then you can hit the raise hand button. And if you do that, we will call upon you like Chuck has done and Elaine has done. And then we'll come back to the chat. So let's start with Chuck and then Elaine and Ray. I'm going to also look in the chat and
Well,
see if there's any also. Go ahead, Peter.
there were two questions that caught my eye a
Yes,
few minutes ago.
good.
Many people ask, and so one question was, do is it permissible to actually do the ocean fertilization and
Hmm.
restore the oceans? And it's an interesting answer to that because there are advisories, right? So if you follow the UN, you had the advisory, don't do that because that would impact CO2 levels, which we're not allowed to do according to the UN. Now, technically, there are no laws. And so the National Academies of Science has said so. The Columbia University Center on Climate Law has said so. There is no law saying you can't do it. Now, the flip side is you can't do it subversively. So if you try to do it without telling people, people would assume that you're an evil person. So one thing we hadn't mentioned yet is our Climate Restoration Safety and Governance Board. And so
Yes.
that's designed to bring all of the relevant communities into the design of these projects so that the First Nations, the environmental groups, the scientists, um, uh, governments, everyone who would be affected by our restoring the climate and restoring the ocean can come in and say, here's my concern, and make sure that the implementation fits, satisfies all of them.
Very
So,
good.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. By the way, I saw another important question. Can people donate less than $100 a month? You could donate $1 a month, whatever you want. You pick the amount. It's just to get the book. It's $100 or more. So, and I saw another question about the 501c3 status that we actually do have that, which makes your donation tax deductible. All right, let's hear from some amazing people out there. Joe, I think you're going to help us unmute. We're going to start with Chuck and then Elaine.
Oh, there was a question on the 501c3. It's the grandparents fund for restoring the climate, or for climate restoration. If you
That's
want
the
to
name
look
of
it
the
up,
foundation.
yeah, you can see we can send you the EIN and so on.
Yep, perfect. Let's go to Chuck.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Peter. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that I was unable to get on at the beginning because you were filled up. Bad news is I was unable to get on in the beginning because it was filled up. I persevered. I think I tried 10 times, and finally someone got off, made space for me.
That's
I
good.
had a wonderful experience this noon. I happen to be the Rotary ambassador for the Climate Restoration Alliance. And I was in Rotary meeting today, and I left the meeting last week or 2 weeks ago. Ilan Mandel gave a presentation on the Grandparents Fund. And after our meeting, one of my friends there came up to me and shared with me about her grandson, who's in high school and in the vocational training program, and that he happened to be listening to the presentation. And she said he was so powerfully moved that there was an opportunity to save the planet for him and his generation, that he's gone to the BOCES school, which is a large area for central New York here, and is asking for us to make a presentation to the classmates. It's the kind of difference that, we really are looking to find. And I wanted to be sure to share that with all of you. It's moved me powerfully.
That's awesome,
I'm
Chuck.
not going away either.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Chuck.
Chuck, I do a lot of talks every week at local schools here in Southern California, from kindergarten all the way up through high school. These kids get it, man, and they're scared.
Yeah.
They are afraid of their future. And I was afraid, running a nonprofit and being involved in this every day. It's terrifying. That's why when I met Peter, I was like, oh, wait, what? There's a way we can do this? Nobody's talking about it. Like, we need to spread the word here. So that's really good to hear, Chuck. Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, let's go to Elaine and then Ray. Again, if you have a question, put up your hand and we'll hang up. There you are.
I've been already donating for several months now to the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And I'm asking, why is there two different kind of a fundraising organization? And which one is most important to donate to?
Well, that's a delicate question, but the Foundation for Climate Restoration is where we started, and then they've been doing advocacy, and currently they just have one part-time person, and so I recommend long-term investment in this, because the Grandparents Fund is actually investing in the projects themselves. And that's something that the Foundation for Climate Restoration is not allowed to do. They're only allowed to do advocacy and political work.
So I should move my money to the new fund, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And tell your friends. The most important thing is to tell your friends, because somewhere you have a friend who's a millionaire or a billionaire who will say, oh, shoot, thank you for telling me about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. Thank you.
Thanks for your support, Elaine. We'll go Ray and then Peter. And if anyone else has questions, we'll go back through the chat. I'm sure there's a bunch we missed in there, but feel free to raise your hand so we for sure call upon you. Ray.
Peter, thanks for all that you do. Good to hear you again. And question is, I know that at some point, these efforts probably will be mostly self-funded from increasing fishing income and so on. how soon do you see that happening? Is that something that you're going to actively encourage, even with these initial projects, maybe get some kind of commitment, if we increase your fishing, you'll give us 5% of that increase or something?
Ray, that's a great question. And it's again, a delicate question. In the long term, I think it needs to be funded largely by people like us. Looking around, there are a lot of gray hairs here who have a clear commitment to future generations. The commercial success of it will be beneficial, but if you did it only for the fish or only for carbon offsets, then those economic returns will not be tuned to purely benefiting the environment. They'll be tuned to the economic and political whims of the universe. And so mostly our intention is that the funding be from the Grandparents Fund and other funds that may evolve similar to it, which are reflecting our concerns for our future generations.
Thank you.
Awesome. Peter, you're going to like this. Joe said we just had someone donate 500 a month and another 1,000. That's amazing. Thank you.
Oh.
By the way, so we're going to go to Peter and then back to Chuck. Carol, you seem to have a good eye on the chat. If there's questions there's just a million things in the chat, not a million, but hundreds of comments in the chat. If there's a question you feel that you would want Peter and I to address, please let us know. But we'll go to Peter.
Peter.
Hi, Peter. It's great to see
Peter,
you.
you have a great name, right, Peter?
we were buddies at that elementary school.
I don't believe it. He looks younger
Peter
than you.
Peter in physics class and in math class and everything else. So great to see you. So my question is about the ethical dilemma. I'm a professor. I teach transportation. I teach an energy class, and I'm always hammering on everybody. We got to use less energy and so on. And the imperative, there used to be other imperatives. Now the imperative obviously is climate change. If we can just suck carbon out of the atmosphere, well then, hey, why not just keep putting stuff up there? I know you're familiar with that. So I just want to ask if you wouldn't mind saying something about how can we be optimistic, not just push for, but actually push optimistically for removing carbon, and at the same time push for reducing how much carbon we're putting up there.
Yeah. Well, Peter, I love that question, especially coming from you, just because I love you. And after 60 years or 61 years or something.
That's great.
The reason to reduce emissions is because diesel fumes kill our kids. So get the buses to electric. The fumes from your gas stove are not good in your house. The ecological destruction of mining coal and fracking land to get natural gas, it's horrible. And the wars, right? The endless wars over resources. Those wars go away when the energy is coming from the sun or coming from wind. And so that's the reason to reduce emissions now is get rid of wars and have a clean atmosphere and clean land for our children. The carbon side of it, it's interesting. If you do the math, and you can probably do the math as well as I can, just because we grew up together before calculators. But CO2 levels are going up about 2 parts per million per year. And so if we accelerate the energy transition by 10 years, it'll make about 3% difference in the CO2 level. It's like nothing. The reason to clean up the energy is for our health, both our health and the environmental health. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. We'll come back to Chuck in a second, but first, Carol in the chat is asking, is there a way to share your recording of this interview with interested groups? Every one of you will get an email tomorrow with the recording of this call. By the way, for anyone listening to this recording right now, if you couldn't get on live, We had way more people than we expected. So we are sorry that you couldn't be on here live, but we are glad that you were listening to the recording. And Peter, let's do this again next month so we can get everybody on here. And we will do this again, and everyone can invite your friends, and we'll just keep doing these. And then there was a question. Oh,
And we're going to have some exciting news next month. I don't know quite what it is because we have like 5 things cooking. One of those is going to pop, and you'll have some exciting news next month.
I love it. Somebody asked, and I don't have the name right in front of me. I would like to see the design, implementation, and monitoring of OIF trials peer reviewed by qualified parties. I know you obviously we spoke a little bit about how we're going to really do this right and do the follow up and just do it better than it's ever been done in the past. But maybe you can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the safety it is pretty well defined in that for half a century now, we've known how to do environmental impact statements. We know how to very much predict what's safe environmentally. And so we need, so each project will have an environmental impact statement. If you're an expert in that, we need a young expert. We have an 80-year-old expert, which is nice, but we want some younger experts in environmental impact statements to judge them. And that's the main safety issue. Measuring the CO2, again, we have experts working on that right now. If you want to join us and pitch in, absolutely want everyone's contribution. Now, the thing about peer-reviewed research is to remember that it's political. You know, peer review is political. And so we have to handle the Biden project before we get good peer-reviewed research, because you know the Pinatubo project, for example, that's not been published because it's politically incorrect, right? It goes against it suggests that we do something that the UN says we shouldn't do, which is restore the climate. Anyway, so it's complex, and the politics are there, and we're being very honest and upfront about the facts and the politics. And join us. Input is needed.
All right, we got 3 more hands up. Let's keep going. You're doing good, Peter. We'll keep going here for a while.
Yeah, thanks.
Chuck, back to Chuck. Chuck, by the way, thank you for sticking it out and being here.
It's great that I was able to be here. Just wanted to add one thing in regards to this time of year. It is a time of year when you can donate to your taxes, but it's also a time of year for Christmas gifts. And as Peter mentioned, I'm one of the gray hairs, and people always ask me, what can I get you? Well, this year, my campaign to reach the 1.5 million Rotarians is I want a gift. And that gift can be as small as $1 and as large as you're able to spend. But the gift I want is you to become part of the Climate Restoration Alliance, and I want you to make a donation and that to the Grandparents Fund. I can't imagine anybody saying no to me. So that's the gift I'm asking. And I invite you to think about this that way. Invite your friends to give you a gift this season and make that gift be a commitment to restoring our climate and backing that commitment up with some donation, whatever size is worthy to them. So that's all I'm going to say tonight. It's great to be here. It really is. It's so exciting.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right, let's keep going. Lots of questions. I love these. You guys are awesome. Alina.
Alina, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
I just hit the unmute button. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Thank you. And you'll also hear my daughter Araya in the background as well.
Mhm.
So my question actually is very simple, and I put it in the chat. I didn't quite catch, Peter, when you said what you'll be fertilizing the ocean with. And my question is whether or not that substance is firstly artificially made, man-made, and if it is, what are the impacts in, creating it in large quantities?
Great question. So the tests in the past have been with iron sulfate, which is just a standard garden fertilizer if you go to your garden center. And I don't know how it's manufactured, so I'll look into that. the amount that's needed is phenomenally low. It's each. Well, yeah, I'll leave. I don't want to go into deep technical numbers, but the standard quote is to do the whole planet permanently to get us back to safe levels would be about a half a tanker of iron. So about I don't know, it's about a 1/10,000th of the amount of iron that's produced globally. Maybe 100,000th. I apologize, I don't have that number. Yeah, so the and sometimes it's been done with iron oxide, and that also works well. So testing will find out what's going to be the best way to go.
Does that make sense, Alina?
Yeah.
Alina, is that good? Thumbs up. And hello to your daughter. Let's go Phil, and then we'll go to Paul. Phil.
Phil Kittle, thank you for being here.
Hey there, Peter. Nice to see you.
Yes.
So you may know Ken Buessler at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. He's one of the leaders of this group, oceaniron.org. Many of the world's leading ocean scientists on ocean iron fertilization that you're referring to. So have you been in touch with them? What have they said? Would you be working collaboratively with them? I'd be interested in that. And that would go a long way, I think, to answer some of the safety questions, some of the oversight questions. There have been 13, to my knowledge, ocean iron fertilization trials going back 20 or 30 years. They've all encountered problems, most of them in the Southern Ocean, one in the North Pacific or two in the North Pacific. And so it is a little tricky to have the to get the science right, I guess, and actually show a indisputable outcome. And so I'm curious if you've worked with that group at all.
Yes. So I talk with Ken periodically. I gave a presentation to that group that's called EXOIS, Exploring Ocean Iron Solutions, last month, I believe it was. And so yeah, we're working together. There was a question someone asked a few minutes ago, which is where would ocean fertilization be done? It's an interesting question, Phil, because classically, as you said, it would be done in the Southern Ocean, north of Antarctica, or in the North Pacific. Now, the South China Sea is neither of those, and that's where we've seen the biggest impact of ocean fertilization. And the conclusion I draw is that the theory we have for ocean fertilization is incomplete at this point. And so my answer to where would it be done is where it actually works, not where it theoretically, well, we should do it, theoretically works is nice, but we're going to do it where it actually works. And we will learn a lot in the next few years on that. And yeah, so anything else about that? No, the name of the game is do everything openly. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you,
Phil.
Phil.
Thank you for the work that you've done over the decades in this, way preceding anything I've done. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We'll go to Paul, but real quick, I wanted to read great quote in or line from Jason in the chat. Peter says, "I'm not yet one of the gray hairs on this call, and have 2 teenage kids. I have to say how happy it makes me that the older adult generation you all represent is so visibly and financially committed to leaving the planet in a livable condition." Just want to read that. Thank you, Jason. And I want to acknowledge everyone else that's been donating as we are talking. You guys are awesome. Let's keep it going. Let's make sure that donation link is at the bottom of the chat so people can see it. We'll go to Paul, and then we'll hear from Alon.
How do I?
You're good. You were on. Do it again.
You just remuted. There you go.
You have said several times that the UN says that we should not do this or that, having to do with geoengineering or whatever. Can't we get to the UN and change the policy?
Well, right. I think the question really is how do we get to the UN to change the policy? And we had a number of people at COP28 working on it, and they failed miserably due to politics. But that, I've been doing advocacy in Congress for hunger and poverty issues for 30 years, and failing a couple times is par for the course. So the answer to how would we do it, I'm confident that the way to do it is through our Biden project, that we need someone who is separate enough from the UN to say, you know what, we have an ethical obligation to our children, because Biden can say that separate from the UN, whereas the people at the UN are constrained by the UN history.
Okay, so that sounds like a good plan.
Great, yeah.
Let's do it.
And yeah, and so people who want to be involved, we want to get, well, we have our Safety and Governance Board, which is including work on the Biden project and getting the resolution introduced both into Congress and into state senates as well, so that to build the agreement reality that we are going to restore the climate. Because the UN language is ambiguous. It doesn't say don't do it, but any reasonable interpretation says that. If everyone is beginning to restore the climate, then people will interpret the UN language, which is that, you've seen it. It never says quite of anything. People will reinterpret it to say, oh, it's okay. But we're creating the, as I like to say with Elon, the trails in the sand, the path in the sand. Yeah, Elon.
Speaking of Alon, wait, I have a question for Alon first. Alon, you're in Israel. What time is it?
It's 2:21 a.m. in the morning, but I'm excited about this, and I wanna thank Peter and Rich for doing such a great job, and I want to we raised about $2,500, so that's amazing, and there's still opportunity to make some more donations, and I want to thank Chuck. You've been such a great friend on this journey, and I appreciate your friendship. And I'll be happy to speak in wherever you're going to invite me, and I'm sure Peter and Rich as well. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Alon, for not only being here in the middle of the night, but for all your commitment and hard work to this project, man. You're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. I
need
met
to know about Alon is he was the original executive director for the Foundation for Climate Restoration back in 2017. We did a little event at the UN, and Alon said he's in, and he's been in ever since 2017. Thank you, Alon.
Amazing.
Yes, it's such a great honor. And Peter, thank you for leading us.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So let's do last call for questions. We've been going an hour and 23 minutes. You guys are amazing. Thank you for still being here. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your donations. Let's look in the chat. By the way, if you put a question in the chat and we did not answer it, it's not because we were avoiding you, it's because we missed it with everything in the chat. But you can email us. You can reply to any of the emails that you've received from us over the last several days about this webinar, and we will get it, and all questions will be answered. I promise you that. Peter, are you looking in the chat? I'm just wondering if there's anything we want to hit there.
Julius Namasano. Is there room for traditional ecological knowledge in this restoration project? I love that question. Last year, I spent a lot of time with First Nations from Sweden to Mexico and Alaska, Peru, Ecuador, just learning and discovering their cultures. And the answer I got to that is the traditional knowledge we have was primarily from the last 10,000 years, some from the last 20,000 years. And that was referenced to a stable Earth. And so a lot of the traditional knowledge we have needs to be up. I don't have the right verb. You have to make up the verb. Updated, let's say. And the First Nations realized that the first thing to do is to restore the climate, and that we have no traditional knowledge for removing intentionally that much CO2. So we're working together with the First Nations. And if you want to be involved, we're definitely looking for someone to help lead our work with the First Nations. We have some people, but we need some leadership. Great question.
Great question. Peter, we got 2 more hands up. We're going to keep
Let's
going.
do it.
I'll do
Vic.
this all night, by the way.
Yes.
We'll go Vic and then Diane. And then Frank put his hand up. Oh,
And
Frank.
Frank, yes.
Go ahead, Vic.
Okay, so hello, Peter, Vic Comfer in Philadelphia. We met a couple times, I think. Good to see.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. What stage is the Biden project at? How likely do you feel he is willing to make the declaration? What's being done? What can this group do to help, if anything?
Great question.
Yeah, I'm confident. I do, as I said, I have a dream that we can that could happen on Earth Day, because it certainly could happen Earth Day in April 22nd, if 24. I wouldn't predict it. I wouldn't bet many dinners on that one. The pathway there is multi-pronged, as I said. So we're designing a symposium at MIT, which will get a lot of agreement. We want to get resolutions in various legislatures. The Pennsylvania legislature would be fantastic. You'll find a local, your representative and ask him or her to just duplicate the California resolution. And op-ed pieces would be great. And F. Wyeth is in charge of the Biden project now. And so one of the things we're doing is raising money for a salary for him so he can actually do it full time. Where to go? Let's see. I guess Rich, you can contact Rich to help strategize that. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you, Vic. That
Great question,
really
Vic. Thank you.
appreciate that question.
Thank you.
Diane.
If I preferred to do lump sum donations versus monthly donations, is that okay? Do I fit in the game here?
Diane, you always fit in the game. And again, Diane has been working with me since 1987 on advocacy for hunger and poverty and Citizens Climate Lobby. Yeah, Diane, whatever works for you will work for us.
Okay, so do you want me to like put an amount in?
Yeah, when you go to the link, there's an option to do monthly or one time.
Okay. I don't know by when exactly, but I'll make a commitment.
Great. Yeah, and what's exciting these days, you probably know, but maybe you don't, that we gray hairs, I'm not over 70 yet, but your required withdrawal from your Roth, from your IRAs, can go straight to straight to a nonprofit like the Grandparents Fund, and that way you don't have to pay tax on it.
Good reminder. I'm just eligible this year.
There you go, Diane.
Let's go to Frank and then Bob.
Frank.
Unmute.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, my question, just sort of following up on 2 people ago, Vic, maybe it was, about the Biden plan. I wanted to find out, does Biden know about this yet?
I don't know. I don't know if he does or not yet.
But it's actually formulated enough that you have like a concrete 1 or 2 pages of this. And so I'd be very interested in seeing that and seeing what that looks like. And from what you said today and over the months that we've been talking with each other, the key stumbling block seems to be the UN resolution or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And but I've not seen anything that's clearly written up that says, here's the UN resolution, here's why it's there, here's why it's a problem, and here's why we have to change it, and here's what we have to go to with the UN. So I'm wondering, do you have something written up like that as well?
No, maybe Frank, you and I can work on that together.
Okay. I like your technique of reverse delegating.
Careful when you ask a question.
All right, I'm in.
Okay, great.
I'll help too, Frank. We'll do it together.
Yeah.
Every time there's one hand left, another one comes up. So we'll keep going. We'll go Bob and then Kevin.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. So I was just following up with Diane and Peter. So if you have an individual retirement account and you have to take a distribution from it, it's pretty tax effective to do what's called a qualified charitable distribution. And that gets to the Grandparents Fund or Foundation for Climate Restoration. I don't know if you can do that before you are required to take a distribution from your IRA. Anyway, just
Yes.
passing that along.
Great.
Thank
Thank you, Bob. Are you okay? Good.
Oh, you can still ask him.
Are you an expert? Are you someone that we can refer to?
Not next. Well, I've been doing it for a few years because I've had to take distributions, and it's for me, that's the only way that I can turn a charitable distribution into a tax advantage.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I don't hit the standard deduction numbers anymore. So, this is a way for people to get a little bit more leverage there and get more resources going to the places that they care about.
Yeah, great.
Peter, it
Thank you,
just
Bob.
has me thinking if we can strategize on how to get to the people whose job it is to help people with
Yeah.
control their money and tax benefits and have them be promoting this, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I can work with people offline and maybe come up with, here are the guidelines, here's how you do it. It's getting awfully late in 2023.
Yeah.
I think it has to happen before the end of the year, and you have to have the check delivered from the trustee. You can't take the money yourself and then donate.
Right. Okay, good. Well, Bob, let's you and Rich get together and strategize.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. Okay. This is our last hand up unless another one goes up, and we will begin to wind down. Kevin, if your question is last, it's got to be a good one, man.
I'll try to stretch it out to give more time for hands to
Yeah.
go up. So, hey, Rich, hey, Peter. I came late, so I apologize if this got covered. I've been, reading furiously to catch up. My question is from what I can see in the literature is that a lot of the previous experiments weren't set up well to measure the impact and verify the carbon sequestration or to measure the negative impact. So I'm wondering, in addition to what you're planning to do, are you specifically setting it up in a way so that you can capture the measures to quantify the carbon sequestration and estimate how long it would be sequestered? Massively complex, I'm sure, as well as measure any negative impacts so we can do cost benefit analysis. So where does measurement fit in? Is that inherent? Is that a side thought?
That's a complicated question. That EXOIS group that we talked about a few minutes ago, they've put together a very complete protocol for doing testing. Their experiments are going to run about $100 million, so it'll take a while for them to get the funding to do the complete job that they want to do. Rather than waiting 10 years for them to complete their project, if they can get that funding, we're focusing on fishery restoration and then measuring the CO2 removal from atmospheric CO2 removal, because the scientific community is wanting to measure the carbon at different depths in the ocean. Now, we know from the 13 tests, there have been exactly 0 reports of bad side effects. and some interesting good side effects like the orca whale births and the salmon increases. And we know that there have been ice ages, so we know that it works because we've seen it work, and we saw it work from the Pinatubo. So there's not a lot of question. Phil Kithill, what he asked, I forgot to answer, that I've talked with the top academic experts and asked them, well, what's the research that's really needed? And they said, well, the truth is we've never seen any bad side effects, so we're not too worried about that. We need to keep looking, but there's no reason to expect any significant bad side effects, just because it's something that nature's been doing continuously for a million or many millions of years. The main thing is optimizing it, because if you do the minimal amount of iron in the wrong place, you don't get any permanent removal. Now, the good news is if you just measure the CO2 removal, you actually get the answer you want. And you can do that from satellite data and from buoys in the ocean at very low cost. So the research will be done. The complete research is expensive, and we're hoping DOE funds it. For political reasons, it ain't happening yet. We shall see. But again, that's why we have the Biden project, to open up the door for the funding for that.
So I got the measurements going to be mostly from the atmospheric CO2, and there's ways to do that. And, that's exciting. And being able to prove the direct impact, so we can double down or, quadruple or, quintuple and, play the numbers game based on that real data and just pour, energy into it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Kevin,
Thank
you
you,
nailed
Kevin.
it. Thank you for saying it so concisely.
Yeah, right. That was good. Awesome. Kevin, we wanted your last question to be a good one, and it was, and no other hands have gone up. So I think we can start to wind down. Maybe if you could, for a final time, Joe, put that link in the chat, and also the email. If anyone has a question they want to ask that maybe didn't want to ask publicly, we will happily answer any questions that you have. On that note, we've been going almost 100 minutes. So Peter, I'm going to give you, it's your show. I'm going to give you the final word. Any final thoughts you have before we wind down? Half our crowd's still here. So
Wow,
we're
look
still
at that.
interested. So yeah, any final thoughts from you before we wind down?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the excellent questions. Thank you for the donations that have happened, and thank you in advance for sharing it with everybody. It makes people happy to make a difference. And so I know I'm embarrassed to ask. Thank God Rich exists, and he can make the ask. And you're probably, more of you are like me than like Rich, I predict. But be bold, be like Rich, and invite your friends to contribute, because it won't be long before Bill Gates sees that there's 10,000 people donating to restore the climate. And he says, he had his first grandchild in April. He's gonna my crystal ball says there's no way that he's not gonna come on board with us sometime this coming year. But that's my crystal ball. Obviously, I can't prove it until next year.
I like it. And that's what going back to what we said about, this is an opportunity for everybody here to be tip of the spear. And if we can create the momentum that gets the attention of the Bill Gateses of the world, we've done our work. So Peter, you are amazing. I think we accomplished exactly what we set out to today, educate people from both a logical standpoint and really understand the complexity of the situation and the emotional component of a future if we don't do anything drastic to restore the climate. So thank you for your heart, your soul, your wisdom. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. If anyone's listening to the replay right now and you have questions, please reach out. Please make donations if you can. Thank you to our whole team. We will absolutely do this again as soon as next month. And I think the last thing we'll say is happy holidays to all of you and your families. Stay healthy, stay fun, and let's do whatever we can to help the planet. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.